Hey there guys, it's Joey and this is going to be connecting with the Wild Unknown Tarot. It was requested that I carry on with this series, I guess season, sharing my thoughts about the imagery on the Wild Unknown, how I connect to it, comparing and contrasting it to other decks perhaps, and for this one I have the Shadowscapes, which you've seen in the past videos, as well as the Paulina Tarot, and I'm going to use both of those to flesh it out a bit because I wanted to focus on these two cards in particular, the Wheel of Fortune and the High Priestess. And it's obviously the right choice. I noticed just before we started recording that the moons actually are either side of the triple goddess, which is great. I decided on these two cards because these two cards have meant a lot to me in recent weeks. I connected with them in a very roundabout fashion. I dreamt about the Wheel of Fortune and a lot of things added up to the Wheel of Fortune when you're looking at signs and symbolism. And that's what happened a few weeks ago with the High Priestess and the last week with the Wheel of the Fortune. And I even meditated on it and wrote it's sort of a poem, a piece, which I will read in a moment as well. So I thought that these two would make for strong connection videos because I have been incorporating these energies into my pathworking very recently. So let's start with the Wheel of Fortune then, seeing as that is the most recent. Let's pop it over here and then we can move things into shot when we contrast. There we go. Okay, there's something very primal and tribal about this Wheel of Fortune. It's almost like a dream catcher. You have these sort of wild twigs all tied together with different coloured string. You've got every colour of the rainbow, the spectrum if you like, in the threads. The top half is the night sky and the bottom half is the sun. So you have light and dark in balance in the background. And you have an owl, barn owl even, wonderful, my favourite, on the topmost branch. I'm going to read to you my poem that came to me while I was meditating on this first, and then we're going to talk about the card itself. So this is what I wrote. Joanne Morris, 2014, all rights reserved. The thread is tied around your branch and pulls you from within, a melody in different shades that calls under your skin. We all can soar on feathered wing or trip on gnarled uproot. Flat on your back you watch the stars and wish on those that shoot. It only takes a second, the time it takes to blink. Remember what you're worth, grow instead of shrink. There's a great sense of interconnectedness about this card. I think we will even zoom in a little bit if we can. The camera may or may not like this, so let's find out. There we go. So what I meant by having a lot of signs come up for this card this week is a lot of things were to do with tens. And tens in the tarot tend to be completion phases. Achievement, maybe. And the Wheel of Fortune, for me, tends to be some sort of conclusion to one phase of life and then the changing of that Wheel of Fortune into something else. So it's very much the night and day aspect that's in this card. You can't have one without the other, and the wheel must turn. Interestingly enough, there's not a whole lot of movement within this card, within the wheel. There is some movement in the sort of shape of the threads that all tying together, which is they sort of weave, and some are sort of hanging a bit looser. They're not taut like a web or a clock or anything like that. There is a looseness to them, but they are still all interconnected. So there's movement there. But in the wheel itself, it's almost vortexy, like you're looking into it, but it doesn't appear to be moving on around it, if that makes sense. It's like that you are moving through it rather than the image is moving itself. And I really feel that this image is very much about everything being interconnected, the universe and balance and things of that nature. That every thread is tied and connected to some part of this universal wheel. A lot of pagans view a lot of things within cycle nature, and some view time as being circular, and the whole idea of the wheel of the year being a wheel, being circular, and seasons and things are all on a wheel. They keep turning around rather than it being a straight line. I mean, that's a whole conversation up into itself. And then there's these different colours of these threads. There is something about the entire spectrum. It can indicate any part of the spectrum. It can be any emotion, it could be any person, it could be at any stage of your life, because these things are all interconnected within the weaving. In this image, it could be said that the owl is a bit of a weird choice. Why is there an owl in the night side and not a bird equivalent on the Wheel of Fortune lower half with the sun? Why is the sun on the lower half anyway? And I honestly feel that it's more like looking into a vortex, like I said, and that's why the purposeful nature of the dark and the light half, as if it's two very separate, maybe even places, and yet they are interconnected by this wheel, the revolving, the movement, that one cannot exist without the other, but they are separate. And you can say that for a lot of things, extremes on emotion, and love and hate being at two polar opposites, and one can't exist without the other. The owl then has to be about wisdom, about searching for inner truths, about far-sightedness, about seeing in the darkness. Perhaps it is about sight and holding things in perspective. You don't necessarily need a bird or symbolism in the daytime, because the light is bright and you can see very easily, but sometimes it's a little bit more difficult to see at night for obvious reasons, and yet barn owls in particular have incredible grace and ability to hunt at night time and survive in those conditions. So perhaps the wisdom in it is about seeing past our expectation, about seeing that there are two sides of this wheel, seeing the interconnectedness of all things. It could just be a visual reminder of the fact that things move on, that whether you're at the top or the bottom of the wheel right now, things will change, things will come to light, things that seem mysterious and unknowable can be known as the wheel turns. There is, as I said, a dream catcher element to this card. Dream catchers are most commonly understood and known as sort of a beautiful wheel, usually, to help filter out bad dreams. And I think that's very poignant within the Wheel of Fortune, because it's basically getting rid of invisible, negative illusions almost. Because the wheel keeps turning, things are interconnected, things will get better, and getting away from that which doesn't serve you, which isn't really real, which isn't permanent, that sort of thing. I actually adore this card in this deck. It's one of my favourite Wheel of Fortune cards that I've ever seen, and I think, you know, I really truly love the Shadowscapes tarot deck as well, but this is probably my favourite Wheel of Fortune card. So let's compare. This is the Shadowscapes one. There's an element of stained glass window about this one, and again it's very interesting in that it doesn't appear to necessarily be the wheel that is in motion, basically. There are fae around it. Night and day do exist within this card too. You have a little crack in the wall showing a crescent moon, and it feels very much like sunlight pouring through a stained glass window in the forefront. I believe the little hole down the bottom is supposed to be sunlight. Let's see. Yeah, I'm pretty sure this is supposed to be daytime down here in this little hole in the wall. Cracks in the wall, circular holes in the wall, seeing through, seeing the full picture. The stained glass window is incredibly beautiful, almost Celtic in feel, which I of course adore, with a sort of star shape at the centre. Flowers in the foreground. Fairies, yep, fairies of an almost solar nature. There's almost a compass feel to this one as well. Let's put it in the centre and focus in. Unfortunately, the imagery in this card is a little bit smaller than I would like. There we go. You see how you can see the points around, like almost like a compass, like all the different directions, almost clock-like. I talked about the fact that I enjoyed the fact that the Wheel of Fortune wasn't clock-like for the Wild Unknown, and I do. You know, I appreciate that it's not necessarily that sort of standard fallback option. The imagery is very similar in this card. There's definite light and day, there's a sort of fairies flitting around and in motion in the ether, time being split up in two, there being a wall between what is and what is yet to come. But I still do prefer the Wild Unknown, especially with its interconnectedness. This card doesn't seem to me to feel as interconnected to all things. It has hints of that, but it's not quite as strong a visual image. Other way. So that's the Shadowscapes in comparison. And then this is the Paulina Tarot. Now this wheel definitely is in motion. It feels like very much like the wheel is turning. There isn't so much daylight imagery in this as there is a host of different creatures. I'm going to have a quick look at the card at the bottom. It's all creatures and fae down the bottom. Right, so arguably it's the four elements within the wheel itself in the sort of mythology. You have a mermaid here. Pretty sure it's a griffin there. Oh, I've forgotten what the winged lions are. Because they're not manticores, I don't think, because that's the one with the snakes. on the tail. I've forgotten what just winged lions are called. Oh my goodness. Right, we'll have to look it up now. But so they represent different elements. And then what's the final one? Minotaur style. Is it just a winged lion? Really? There isn't a name for a winged lion. Oh. There isn't a name for the winged lion other than a winged lion. Okay, right. I'm not doing too badly then. That might be why I couldn't remember it. So there's a mythology element here. It also represents the 4 elements, so water, air, fire and earth. And then you have all this sort of wild parade of fairies and animals underneath. And the serpents are beautiful. This I don't know how well you'll be able to. Up the centre here is interlinking serpents, and interlinking serpents like that often represent literally the world and the universe and the intertwined nature of knowledge and things and that sort of thing, you know, the beginning and the end of all things, often devouring one another. Which is interesting and beautiful. I actually like the snakes more than the rest of the imagery. I do get on with the Paulina Tarot. That's not one of the strongest cards though, I've got to say. It's a shame really. Okie dokie. So that is the comparison of those two. And I hope that made some sense. So now we're going to switch out this one. And we're going to talk about the High Priestess. So, the High Priestess is a card of magic, and for me there's often a deep water association with this card, and it actually works with this card too. On the surface of it, a white tiger might seem like an odd choice. However, tigers are the big cat swimmers. They're like the only big cat that enjoys water. They're really, really strong swimmers. And once you know that, that sort of ties in with the mystery of the High Priestess, of delving into your own psyche and the water representing that. You have the crescent moon again, night time, mystery, and then this beautiful orb right at the centre of her paws, almost in watercolour, tying back to that water feeling, and of course that has that sort of fortune teller's ball about it. Okay. So I'm going to read to you a few notes. I made some notes from other places and my own thoughts. The number 2, which rules the cards, is about balance and duality, obviously. And obviously you have light and dark within this card, and you have light and dark within the tiger's fur, if you like. Even within its very fur, within its very essence, is light and dark in balance. The stripes, you know, which is beautiful. I love that. White tigers are often considered very mysterious, much more rare. In China, tigers are symbols of darkness and the new moon, as well as being symbols of brightness and the full moon. So that represents the duality. The white tiger is nocturnal, it's considered rare, it's considered a huge symbol of personal inner strength and fortitude. So there's a whole inner power thing going on there. Is there anything else I wanted to share? Oh, tigers are known to drag their kill great lengths to keep what is theirs secret. So they're considered a keeper of secrets. Okay, so I was seeing white tiger imagery everywhere a few weeks back, and it was a week of magic, of mystery, of feminine energy and water, and that whole delving into the psyche, delving into something deeper. Tigers are often seen as being kind of still. Does that make sense? They seem to me to remain very still. There's a thing about tigers, and they have that air of mystery and magic, and their every movement, of course being a cat, is very, very graceful, but they have this stillness about them, and I have the feeling that they're one of the big cats that will watch a lot before taking action. They're kind of solitary as well, which makes sense within the High Priestess card. There is an element of solitary introspection about this card, delving into your own inner mysteries and knowing your own inner ability and inner power, as tigers are obviously incredibly powerful. And I have to say, again, I think this is one of my favourite High Priestess cards. It's one of these High Priestess cards which takes effort to get to know, because you're so used to seeing the standard High Priestess card that when you see something like this, it's out of your comfort zone, it's out of the norm. There's something incredibly powerful about the imagery, and you have to actually go searching for the answer, which I love about this card, because that's what the High Priestess can be all about, sort of the inner personal searching, the journey. So let's compare it then to the High Priestess from Shadowscapes, which I have to say unfortunately is not my favourite one out of the Shadowscapes tarot. The Shadowscapes tarot has some beautiful imagery, but the High Priestess one, I don't know, lacks a bit for me. Again, we have a beautiful barn owl in flight this time. You have what looks very much like an ammonite fossil down here, and spirals in this tree. Let's move this and actually focus in a little bit so we can see a little bit. I'm sorry that the images are smaller. So we've seen that there, and then we'll focus in on her a bit. So she's holding a bitten apple. She's holding her cloak up. Her two hands are up in the sort of standard High Priestess, sort of engaging with the sky usually, and she is in effect engaging in almost flight in this picture. It's not a bad picture, I'm not saying that at all, but it could have been slightly stronger given some of the beautiful bird imagery that is present within the rest of this deck. There is something between crow and swan here, which of course I love, because swan and crow are two birds which I feel very strongly about. And then the barn owl, of course. And there is something about her lifting off into the air, her cloak hanging from her arms like that. She's obviously kitted out with, I think they look like branches in her belt. I'm going to have a quick look. Yeah. And then leaves hanging around. So there is things going for this card. There is that uplifting, which can also be about looking into the personal inner journey. However, I think the water imagery works better in this case. I mean, theoretically she could be swimming, depending on your point of view, but the owl at the bottom, of course, really does give the impression that she's lifted off the tree, which has divided in two or three, no, it's divided in three branches. Sorry, it's three branches, there you go. and is directing her course, which it works for the image of the card. However, I really do like the High Priestess from the Wild Unknown. I think it just pushes that personal introspectiveness a little bit more. And then in the Paulina Tarot, we have a very, what I feel is very much a personified image. This looks very much like a pomegranate right here, bitten, and I think it has seeds. So of course the idea of her eating a pomegranate and things is, it's to do with wisdom. The tale is, of course, that she ate 6 seeds and then she had to spend 6 months with Hades, and it's to do with explaining the seasons on that basis. But there's knowledge and things involved in perhaps a darker sense with pomegranate imagery. I don't connect to the Greek mythology on a personal level, but I know the mythology very well. I enjoyed the mythology and still do. So there's that. It's a very dark image, this one. It's a very dark image when you start getting into it. And that's cool, because it doesn't happen very often, I don't think, unless decks are purposefully trying to be dark. Whereas I don't think the Paulina Tarot deck is particularly trying to be dark. So let's zoom in a bit. Not that far, okay. So she has this sort of crown on her head that looks very much like a crescent moon here, with the sort of veil around the outside. The veil around the outside looks like it might be almost showing the world, trees and or earthy colours. And then I've got to say, the inner side of her looks a little bit like Turmoil and Nightmares. It really does. This looks like a book to me. So knowledge being present, but all the eyes around it, it's not the most sinister thing you've seen all day. It's creepy. And of course there is energies of, you know, going into the darkness and learning, overcoming your own inner fear to reach an understanding. It's definitely there. And then, you know, of course, the pomegranate. The snakes are back. This is looks very much like it's supposed to be a lotus down here. Lotus has a lot of dark goddess connotations. I think it's associated with Lilith in some respects, but lotuses are beautiful flowers that bloom out of muck, showing that even out of great times of darkness and sludge and muck and mire, something beautiful can grow. So that being connected to the pomegranate there, in essence, is very symbolic. And then you've got bees down the bottom, snakes crawling around her, these sort of, I guess they're almost tree sprites, really elongated, very ghostly, I think. And then you have what looks very much like almost silver birch here. Gosh, this card is loaded with imagery. This one, the moon in the background. I'm not entirely sure what her crown is meant to be made of. The problem with this deck is that the booklet with the descriptions is terrible. We will have a look if any of these things are actually mentioned. We'll see what it says. An octopus embracing the High Priestess. There's an octopus? Okay, am I going mad? Do we see an octopus? Oh, right. Okay, the octopus, these two little tentacles down the bottom coming out of the water. Fair enough. Wouldn't have noticed the octopus. And that's the first thing the book mentions. Insight and vision. Spirits by her side are guardians of concealed knowledge. The totem trees patterned with codes reach into higher places. Ancient all-seeking eyes peer out from a portal in the priestess's cloak. The wasps, they're wasps, fair enough, harness female warrior energy. Yeah, I guess that could be wasps. They don't look stingy enough to be wasps, but okay. So that's what the book says about this image, but you know, this is a beautiful image. It's freaky, but there's a lot to get into. It is very portal-like. Do you know what? It's almost like looking into, as if you had opened a tree portal to some ultimate dimension. I've got to say the trees look like birch to me, silver birch almost, and that's new beginnings. I love silver birch. I think it's fantastic energy to work with. And there's also sort of a journeying going on behind it, like steps. So there's a lot of imagery to work with in this card, which is always interesting when you obviously when you compare it to a card which is pretty simplistic-ish. And I think it really depends in this circumstance how you interact with cards, how you best key into messages, because I can do either now, having worked with both. Although I've got to say the Paulina Tarot was one of my first decks. It's much easier because you get visual overload, basically. You have 101 different things to look at that start to key in, and you can get the imagery and you can get the synchronicity between the imagery. So you can go look at lotus, you can go look at pomegranate, you can go look at silver birch, you can see how you feel about those things, moon imagery, octopi apparently, and all the rest of it. But for something like the High Priestess in the Wild Unknown Tarot, it's a little bit trickier because the imagery is just very subtle. You haven't got as much visionary overload going on. You haven't got as much to work with, maybe. So you have to go looking. You have to maybe meditate a little bit more on the images at hand. You have to think, you know, what am I actually looking for within this card? And sometimes it's really good, sort of more meditative basis about feeling the energies of this card, which I absolutely did a couple of weeks ago. It really, really sang to me. So that is it for this episode of Connecting with the Wild Unknown Tarot. Many blessings.